Good morning, everybody. Last week we were left with something akin to a cliffhanger situation. And I was told at the end of the service that I finished today with another one, I'll be duly punished. But that won't happen because we come to the end of the story today. Ruth's, under Naomi's instructions, had gone to the threshing floor knowing that Boaz would be there. She waited until he wined and dined and had fallen asleep, as men do after they wine and dine, at the far end of the threshing floor before she came and lay at his feet. She deliberately uncovered his feet so that in due course he would wake up prematurely. We noted that this was a very high-risk manoeuvre, extremely high-risk manoeuvre that could have had all sorts of disastrous implications, but for the strength of character of both Boaz and Ruth. Boaz understood all the signals she had given him and correctly discerned the situation as a marriage proposal from her. But Boaz has both good and bad news for Ruth in this highly charged moment. The good news is that he's delighted to carry out all that Ruth asks because he obviously loves her. The bad news is that although Boaz is a genuine kinsman redeemer from Elimelech's clan, from the right clan, that there's another closer relative who should be given first preference to redeem Elimelech's property and to fulfill the marriage responsibilities that come with that. Boaz is a man of impeccable character, and he is not going to take Ruth by deception. He didn't do it on the threshing floor, and he's not going to do it in the town. He will decide the matter at the city gate that very day, but Ruth has to wait in the meantime. Chapter 3 ended with this matter unresolved. So then let us read chapter 4 and see what happens. Ruth chapter 4, get your Bible out, whatever device you have it on, and follow on with me, please. Meanwhile, Boaz went up to the town gate and sat down there just as the family guardian he had mentioned came along. Boaz said, "Come over here, my friend, and sit down." So he went over and sat down. Boaz took 10 of the elders of the town and said, "Sit here." And they did so. Then he said to the family guardian, "Naomi, who has come back from Moab, is selling the piece of land that belonged to our relative Elimelech. I thought I should bring the matter to your attention and suggest that you buy it in the presence of these seated here and in the presence of the elders of my people. If you will redeem it, do so. But if you will not, tell me so I will know. For no one has the right to do it except you, and I am the next in line. I will redeem it," he said. Then Boaz said, "On the day you buy the land from Naomi, you also acquire Ruth the Moabite, the dead man's widow, in order to maintain the name of the dead with his property." At this the family guardian said, "Then I cannot redeem it, because I might endanger my own estate. You redeem it yourself. I cannot do it." Now in earlier times in Israel, for the redemption and transfer of property to become final, one party took off his sandal and gave it to the other. This was the method of legalising transactions in Israel. So the family guardian said to Boaz, "Buy it yourself," and he removed his sandal. If you look at the picture, you'll see the sandal being transferred there. Then Boaz announced to the elders and all the people, "Today you are witnesses that I have bought from Naomi all the property of Elimelech, Kilion and Mahlon. I've also acquired Ruth the Moabite, Mahlon's widow, as my wife, in order to maintain the name of the dead with his property, so that his name will not disappear from among the family or from his hometown. Today you are witnesses." Then the elders and all the people at the gate said, "We are witnesses. May the Lord make the woman who is coming into your home like Rachel and Leah, who together built up the house of Israel. May you have standing in Ephratah and be famous in Bethlehem. Through the offspring the Lord gives you by this young woman, may your family be like that of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah." So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife. We got there. When he made love to her, the Lord enabled her to conceive, and she gave birth to a son. The women said to Naomi, "Praise be to the Lord, who this day has not left you without a family guardian. May he become famous throughout Israel. He will renew your life and sustain you in your old age. For your daughter-in-law, who loves you and who is better to you than 7 sons, has given him birth." Then Naomi took the child in her arms and cared for him. The women living there said, "Naomi has a son," and they named him Obed. He was the father of Jesse, the father of David. And then we have this little genealogy, and we are going to include it. This then is the family line of Perez. Perez was the father of Hezron, Hezron the father of Ram, Ram the father of Amminadab, Amminadab the father of Nahshon, Nahshon the father of Salmon, Salmon the father of Boaz, Boaz the father of Obed, Obed the father of Jesse, and Jesse the father of David. There's a reason that's there, and we'll get to that later. We need some background to put this story, or this part of the story, into its proper context at the time. Verse 1, for example, says that Boaz went to the town gate to sit there. Now, I think I've explained this before, but for those who were not here, we'll explain it again. The town gate was a very important gathering place in the day. It wasn't just the entry point to the town, although it certainly was that. It was also the meeting place of the elders of the town. It was the place where business was done. If you wanted a legal transaction happening, it happened at the town gate. And Boaz indeed had some business to do, and he wanted to ensure that there would be witnesses to the transaction. Buying and selling land. The next thing we understand is the buying and selling of land in Israel at that time. We know that Ruth is set in the period of the Judges. The Israelites have left the slavery of Egypt behind, and they've now arrived in the Promised Land. The land was equitably divided among the 12 tribes at the time of Joshua. Here's the overriding principle. All the land still belonged to God. Anyone that had land amongst the Israelites were stewards of God's land. Very important to understand that. If the family fell into hard times, their land could be sold, but only for a time. Every 50 years was a year of Jubilee, when the land would revert back to the original family. So then a sale of land was more like a lease, fully paid up front. So if a piece of land was sold, say, immediately after the year of Jubilee, there was another 50 years before it reverted back. So let's say they sold it for $50,000. If at some point someone wants to redeem that land, say 25 years down the track, well, the price wouldn't be $50,000, it would be $25,000, because that's what's left in terms of the lease. Now, here's the cruncher. If there was no male heir to redeem the land, then the land would be forfeited to the person who purchased it along the way. If you've purchased some land to get a family out of trouble and at the end of the day it's not been redeemed and there's no male heir to inherit it, the land is yours to keep. That's a win. That's a big win. That is why this kinsman redeemer law is so important. This is why if a married man died without a male heir, his brother was to marry his wife to bear a son, who would be the new family heir of the deceased brother. We explained last week that this law was expanded beyond brothers to include the nearest next male kinsman. This brings us to Boaz. There is a nearer next male of kin ahead of him in the established order of things. While there is an obligation on brothers to marry a widow in these circumstances, there's no obligation whatsoever on uncles, nephews, or anyone else down the line. They had the option to refuse should they so desire, and now we understand the urgency of the moment. Boaz clearly wants to marry Ruth as her kinsman redeemer, and with all that means, but he's not the first man in the queue. This matter now needs some urgent resolution. So Boaz is doing the deal. We return to our story to find that this first in-line kinsman redeemer arrives at the town gate just after Boaz. Isn't that amazing? Another one of those coincidences that are really God incidences. So Boaz gathers the elders of the town as witnesses and puts the proposal to this unnamed kinsman redeemer. Well, I wonder why he wasn't named. Well, I'll tell you why. It's because he didn't do what he was supposed to do. There's an incredible amount of... we note here that he says Naomi is selling her land. You saw that in the text? Big problem here. There's an incredible amount of technical information in the commentaries on this point. Leon Morris, in his commentary, devotes 3 whole pages to that one verse that says selling the land. And I'm not going to go through all of that with you. The context of the story tells us that Naomi is not selling the land. She is wanting someone to redeem the land for her and for her family line down the way. Elimelech had already sold the land, most likely, before setting out to Moab. He would have needed the money to have working capital in his new place of residence, and we know from chapter 1 that he only intended to be there for a time. This would give him the opportunity to run a profitable business in Moab while Israel was in drought, and he would be able to come back and redeem his land, pay the money back, what was left of the 50 years, in better times. What he didn't figure on was that he would die there in Moab. And what else he didn't figure on was that his 2 sons would be dead with him, having not produced an heir. Disaster, self-interest and greed sometimes have disastrous consequences. We should never forget that. What Naomi is looking for here is a land transaction that redeems Elimelech's land. So effectively, Boaz puts it to this unnamed kinsman redeemer that Elimelech's land is available for redemption if he wants it. Boaz makes it clear that if this family member doesn't want it, then Boaz himself will purchase it. The man considers the proposal and thinks to himself that this looks like a good proposition. He said, I will redeem it. First thing he said, I will redeem it. But he hasn't thought it through. As he considers this proposal, he thinks, I've got this much now. If I buy this much extra, even though it costs me something now, it will be so much better for me in the future to have a double portion. It would be so much more to pass on to his own eldest son, presuming he already had one. He's taking a long-term view here, and it's a greedy one. He doesn't care about Naomi. He's caring about acquiring more land for his own family. He looks at Naomi and sees that she's unlikely to produce more sons, so his own, whether he has one now or later, his own son will inherit the double portion and he will be looked after in his later years. This decision, again, has self-interest stamped all over it. Remember, we're in the times of the judges when people did what they thought was right for them, not what they thought was right under God's eyes. Boaz is a man of impeccable character, but there seems to be a whole bunch of men around him who don't share that character, including this unnamed first-in-line kinsman redeemer. So this man, driven by self-interest and greed, decides to buy the land. Then Boaz gives him the bad news. because this kinsman redeemer has not done his homework. Boaz informs him that with the redemption of the land comes the responsibility to look after and marry Ruth, and to provide for an heir for Mahlon, so that his name and Elimelech's family name will continue on. The son he bears to Ruth then will inherit this land that he is redeeming. Oh, that changes the perspective. His own son's not going to receive a double portion after all. In fact, he'll have less of an inheritance because he's just about to spend it on some land. Oh, I don't think I should do that. Well, that's why he says in verse 6, then I cannot redeem it, because I might endanger my own estate. Right there in the text. I might endanger my own estate. You redeem it for yourself. I cannot do it. When God asks you to do something, or when the law expects you to do something, you should do it. This man is just greedy. So then, this opens the way for Boaz to marry Ruth. With all of the legal requirements met and done with the honour that we come to expect from a man of such impeccable character, notice the blessing offered to Boaz by the people gathered in the town. Verse 11 and 12. May the Lord make the woman who is coming into your home like Rachel and Leah, who together built up the house of Israel. May you have standing in Ephratah and be famous in Bethlehem. Through the offspring the Lord gives you by this young woman, may your family be like that of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah. Please take particular note of verse 13, because here we see the complete turning around of the family fortunes, especially for Ruth. So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife. When he made love to her, the Lord enabled her to conceive, and she gave birth to a son. I said at the outset that God's not mentioned too often in this book, but his fingerprints are all over it. Well, here he enters right into the story itself. The Lord enabled her to conceive. She couldn't conceive a child with the younger man, with Mahlon, but all of a sudden now she can conceive because the Lord enabled her to conceive. Can we have our next slide, please, Patrick? Up until this point, God has most definitely been at work in the lives of Naomi, Ruth, and Boaz. But we have had to observe these God instances for ourselves. God waits until the situation is desperate for Naomi, and she doesn't return empty to Bethlehem, as she claims, because a very faithful, loyal, and loving Ruth has accompanied her, even though for her it means coming into enemy territory as an alien. Ruth has seen enough faith in God in Naomi to convince her that she wanted to believe in this God too. Hence the pledge she made in chapter 1. Where you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people. Your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. This was a genuine expression of the Hesed love of God already placed in her, that's full of compassion, kindness, caring, gentleness, commitment, loyalty, all these characteristics of love that God has for each one of us and has placed in each one of us. And if we're to live out our faith, those qualities should be evident in our own lives. Compassion, kindness, caring, gentleness, commitment, loyalty. It was no coincidence that in chapter 2, Ruth found herself gleaning in the field of Boaz. Of the hundreds of fields she could have chosen, God led her to this one. It was not by coincidence that on the very first day she was there, Boaz happened to be there as well, checking out up on his business. And he noticed her and inquired about her. He showed her such magnanimous kindness and generosity, way beyond anything that normal expectation that would be required of him, as he seeks to care for both Ruth and Naomi through his benevolence and generosity, also characteristics of that Hesed love that he shows to us. Are we showing those same characteristics of benevolence and generosity? But here in chapter 4, this hand of God that has been implicit all the way through the story is now particularly expressed in the text. It was the Lord, Yahweh, who enabled her to conceive and bear a son to Boaz. Ruth, who through the years she was married to Mahlon, was unable to conceive and give him an heir to carry on the family line, now finds that she is pregnant by Boaz by the very grace of God. All of the blessings that come into our lives are by the very grace of God. And so we come to this genealogy. Why is all this so? Why is it important for us to know the story and to see its place in the grand plan God has for the redemption of humanity? We find the answer to at the end of chapter 1, at the end of this chapter, in one of those genealogies that we often see as boring, and we skip over them. How many have done that? I don't believe the other 97 of you that didn't put up your hand. We've all done it. We've all done it. Take note who is at the end of this genealogy. It is David. This genealogy is included to inform us of the line of King David. The line of King David, of course, ultimately takes us forward from here to Jesus, the Redeemer of the world. God established a covenant with David that the king from his family line would be king forever, referring, of course, to Jesus Christ, who is our kinsman redeemer. That's why this genealogy is there. It's pointing us to Jesus. So let us read this genealogy again, and there might just be something else in there that we would have missed if we just skipped over it. This then is the family line of Perez. Perez was the father of Hezron. Hezron the father of Ram. Ram the father of Amminadab. Amminadab the father of Nahshon. Nahshon the father of Salmon. Salmon the father of Boaz. Boaz the father of Obed. Obed the father of Jesse. And Jesse the father of David. It's the family line from Perez to David. First mentioned is Perez. It's not important that he's mentioned here. What's really important is who is not mentioned here. And that's the mother of Perez. And there's a parallel background story here about another instance of a kinsman redeemer, or several, as is the case in this instance. Judah, if you remember, was one of the 12 sons of Jacob. Judah had 3 sons, and Tamar married the eldest one. Unfortunately, guess what happened? He died. So then she married the second one. And guess what happened? He died. But he's got a third son. Now, the third son is not yet of marriageable age. So she has to wait until he is of marriageable age. And here's where the story gets very, very messy. Self-interest comes to the fore once more. Judah, the father of these 3 boys, has absolutely no intention of letting Tamar marry the third one. Why? Because the first 2 died. How would you feel about it if you were the third son? Would you be a bit nervous about marrying Tamar? Yep. When Tamar has finally worked out Judah's evil intention here, that she is never going to marry, she took matters into her own hands. As Judah was heading out on a journey, she dressed herself up, pretended to be a prostitute. Yep. Judah succumbs to the deception and sleeps with her, and guess what? She becomes pregnant. Perez, our first mentioned person in this genealogy, is the result of that seduction. There is scandal in the family line. When the ruse is discovered, Judah has to admit and declare that Tamar is more righteous than he, because she is trying to fulfill the law which he is breaking. He is breaking the law by denying her her marital rights, but she worked it out. So much for Tamar. 4 generations down the track, we'll skip a few, we have Salmon. Salmon was married to Rahab. She's not there in that list either, but she should be. She's in the list in Matthew in the line of Jesus. Rahab was a prostitute who hid the 2 spies that Joshua had sent in to spy out the land in Jericho. She had recognised that God was with the Israelites and wanted to come under their banner because the situation was hopeless for her own people. While this was motivated by self-interest, she did protect the spies at the risk of her own life. Had she been discovered doing this, her own king would have finished her, would have done her in for treason. By faith, she became part of God's family. If you think that I've got that wrong, you might want to read Hebrews chapter 11, because she is listed there as one of the heroes of the faith. So in these few generations, we've had a woman who pretended to be a prostitute to seduce her father-in-law to fulfill the requirements of the law, and a real prostitute who saw the wisdom of aligning herself with God. And so we have scandal upon scandal in the family line, going down to David and ultimately to Jesus. It's not finished there, because we are in the story of Ruth. Ruth is who? A Moabitess. They're not to have anything to do with the Israelites, according to the order of things earlier in the scripture. They certainly weren't to intermarry, but here she is marrying Boaz, an alien, a foreigner, coming into the family line. How much more scandal can we have in all of this? So what does this most peculiar biblical genealogy have to teach us? Well, here's the crunch. God knows each one of us intimately. He knows our family line better than we do. He knows the mess, the carnage, the train wrecks of families past. And he still loves us. And he is willing to use us in his kingdom for his purposes. He is far more concerned about our hearts than he is about our heritage. He is able to take anyone from any messy past and redeem them to be one of his very own dearly beloved children. We sang it earlier. I am a child of God. Think back over your own family history. I'll guarantee somewhere back there there's mess. Somewhere back there there's carnage. Somewhere back there things were not right. And that applies to just about all of us. I don't know you individually. I can't say that about you, you or you, but you know it about yourself if you think hard enough about it. He can redeem our mess and turn it into a divine message. He can redeem our trash and transform it into triumph. He doesn't call the qualified, he qualifies the called. The whole story of Ruth has been about turning tragedy into triumph. And today we see it as Boaz marries her and redeems the family line. Ruth was once married to Mahlon, whose name meant weakling. She is now, by God's grace, married to Boaz, whose name means of strength. She's gone from a weakling to strength. We see that exemplified in the strength of his character. Rick Warren made some observations about character in a sermon I listened to online. He said that our character is the sum total of our choices. We all make choices, We make them every day. We make our choices, and then our choices make us. Elimelech made his choice, and his choice made him. He died. He adds that we don't control all of the circumstances in our lives, but we do control our choices. Elimelech made a choice, a bad one. It led to his death and the death of his sons. Naomi made a choice, a good one, to return to her homeland where she could trust God for her provision. In Bethlehem, the house of food, Ruth made a choice, a life-changing choice, to trust God and to stick with Naomi come what may, even though the odds were highly stacked against her. It was a choice of faith which revealed her character to be full of the hesed love of God that she carried with her as a result of this newfound faith. Boaz made a choice, a whole series of choices actually, that all honoured God by seeking the good of others and placing their interests ahead of his own. This too revealed the hesed love of God within him, a kindness and a generosity rarely seen in his day, and also, may I add, rarely seen today. All this is but a picture of the hesed love God has for us, and a picture of the redemption he offers us in Jesus Christ. Jesus was the very expression of God's love towards us, was not only promised to be born of David's line, which of course includes Ruth and Boaz, but he is also the King who is to reign forever. He will reign forever as the King of kings and the Lord of lords, and he is our Saviour. We have a relationship with him. Boaz married Ruth to produce an heir to continue the family name. Listen to what Paul says about us, in his letter to the Galatians, chapter 4. But when the set time had fully come, God sent his son, born of a woman, born under the law, to redeem those under the law, that we might receive adoption to sonship, or to be children. Because you are his children, God sent the Spirit of his Son into our heart, the Spirit who calls out, Abba, Father. So you are no longer slaves, but God's children. And since you are his children, he has also made you heirs, joint heirs with Jesus Christ. As heirs with Christ, we receive the fruit of the Spirit that Paul talks about in that very next chapter. Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. All characteristics of that hesed love of God. We've seen them exemplified in Ruth and Boaz, and I trust we're seeing and experiencing them exemplified in us. God has called us to be his children in order that we may reveal his character to a desperately needy world. He calls us to be people of character within our own sphere of influence, that others will want to know more about him and to learn to trust him. This was how Ruth was attracted to God through Naomi. It's a template for us to follow in the interactions we have with others with whom we share some kind of relationship. Jesus redeems us, just like Boaz redeemed Ruth. And we are to encourage others to embrace that same redemption by the Jesus they see in us. Just like Naomi was the only Bible Ruth ever saw, so we may well be the only Bible that others near us may see. May they see in us the love of God, that hesed love, that joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control being revealed in the way we do life. That can only happen if we're honest with ourselves, if we're honest about the mess we create for ourselves, if we're honest about the mess others have created for us. Over these last 4 weeks, I'm sure there's been things that have touched you. And if they have, I want you to come out now. Don't wait for a song. We're too late for a song. If you need prayer, I want you to come out now. If you've got family tragedies of the past that are holding you back from being all that you could be, come out the front and ask for prayer. God can redeem any situation. All things work together for good for those that love God, that are called according to his purpose. If there's stuff in your life preventing you from being the person God wants you to be, come out now. Right now, this instant. Take a seat in the front. We'll have someone pray. If you think you're not good enough, come out the front and find out what God says about you, the way he sees you. He sees the same things in you that he saw in Ruth. He brought an alien into a nation and became part of the family line of Jesus. God can take your mess and give you a message. God can take your trash and make it a triumph. God can take your desperation and turn it into a destiny. It's up to you. God has got a heart to bless you, to honour you, to elevate you, to give you a place and a purpose, and to give you a destiny. It's up to you to respond.